So, Berto, I want to get into something today. It is something I think about a lot. It's something I have arguments with other people in my mind about a lot on a number of levels, in a number of different ways. It's a very personal thing to me. It has spanned arguably my entire life since I can remember, since I was a young child. It has to do with climate change and environmentalism and pollution and policy and government and politics and everything. And I want to get into it. I have a lot that I want to say. I want to clear the record, and I want to respond to some emails that I've received over the years that have been from people that like this podcast but criticize me for what I say or my take or how I feel about things. Let's get into it. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist, and I'm also a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I grow scone gardens.
Okay, so this is an interesting email, and I might get triggered.
Oh.
I mean, not like severely, but it'll become apparent. So patron Aaron from Boulder, she wrote in and says, I'm listening to an episode recently with you and Humberto where you went on a bit of a rant about climate change and how it was too late.
I remember that one.
You do?
Well, if it's the one I'm thinking about, yeah, because there was one in particular where you were talking about that.
I don't remember. It's like, what do you remember about that episode?
I remember you being very grim, I suppose, about the stark reality of where we're at and what we can and can't do and are not doing. And I was, wouldn't say I was shocked, but I was just, I tried to give a perspective of like, well, I think we should still try, but
Was I saying it was too late?
Yeah.
I was literally saying it's too late. We're done.
I mean, you were certainly saying that we are not doing anything that we need to do, and it doesn't seem like we're about to start.
That doesn't sound like I'm saying it's too late.
Well, it's certainly not hopeful.
True.
Yeah.
But it's not saying it's too late.
Oh, I don't think you were saying that scientifically it's too late. I think the message I got was like, we're A, not doing what we need to do if we wanted to have it not be too late, and B, I'm not sure we're going to. Yeah. That's what I got.
To me, you can argue with this, is very different than it's too late.
Sure. Yeah, but I could see how someone would be like, oh, well, then we're screwed.
Right?
I could see it. I just imagine if we're talking about something else and it's like, your favorite football team or something. And I'm like, well, they don't have the right people. They're not going to make the right trades. And the coach is not going to listen to all the advice that they're getting. So, and then you say that. And so then the lesson someone could take is like, they're going to lose. They're not going to, it's over. The season's over for them.
Yeah. Okay.
That's kind of the...
Well, going on with the email. So to start over, I listened to an episode recently where you and Humberto where you went on a bit of a rant about climate change and how it was too late. Chiming in, I can't imagine myself saying it was too late because I don't think that. I might have said that in the episode because I was ranting, and this in all likelihood was years ago because I can't feel like you and I haven't.
It wasn't that long ago. I mean, my sense of time might be away.
Yeah.
It was here though.
Oh, it was?
It was in this
office. Okay. Well, that would be within the last 4 years.
Yeah.
So, anyway, going on. It made me really sad to hear you struggling so much with it. Just chiming in. Yeah. Thanks, Aaron. That's empathy. That's nice. Going on. I know you see it as quote unquote realistic, your point of view. And on one hand, it absolutely is realistic. But on the other hand, it's causing you and others a lot of distress to think this way. For many, if not most, it's also very unmotivating to see it as something we can't do anything about anymore. End of email. So I wanted to talk about this because I've received other emails or comments along these lines. And I think it's important to delineate the way we already have to some extent. So let me start from the beginning. Since the 1970s, since I was a kid, I have been worried about human effect on our environment. It started in kindergarten when we would watch these films of littering. There was a huge movement in the 70s to reduce littering. And I don't know if anyone my age would remember, and maybe they have it on YouTube, but I could see this not actually being on YouTube. But it was these Muppets almost characters. We would call them like life-size Muppet. You know, on the Muppet Show sometimes.
I think I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's these kids, and they're walking, I think, on a trail. This is all like my memory. And some of the kids were, if not all the kids were littering, and these Muppet, life-size Muppet characters were like, they're littering, let's get them.
Right.
And I remember throughout my childhood and early adulthood, me and my friends would joke around about that line, let's get them, in various different contexts. And I remember talking a lot about littering and pollution and environmentalism and conservation, turning off the lights when you leave the room. I mean, you know, in the 70s, it was a part of my life. It was a big part of my life. And, you know, moving forward through the decades, I have always done nearly everything one could do to reasonably help the situation from my position of almost near powerlessness on the overall picture. And I would say that even on average of Seattleites, and this is self-serving, but I would give myself a pretty high grade for what I have been doing. And not only what I've been doing, but also what I've been looking into in terms of the research. Like I have looked into on my own the specifics around recycling because it's actually quite complex. I remember looking into it 30 years ago and learning that each type of recycling product that we recycle from our house, because Seattle has had a recycling program early. In fact, there's sometimes when I travel today and find that there are communities in the States that have no recycling.
Don't have any recycling. Yeah.
And we've had it since the 80s.
Yeah.
And so I have been living at least that aspect of it since then, and have occasionally looked into the technology and the reality around it, because there are some items that we recycle and feel good about, but actually it's just going in a landfill, or it's just relieving us of our own guilt and our own responsibility, right? If I'm recycling, then I can drive my SUV to work, right? That, not a big deal. But I would say, if I could pick one, I would say do not drive the SUV and don't bother recycling. Do both. You don't drive an SUV and recycle. But if you're going to pick one, don't drive the goddamn SUV. That's like way worse for society. And some recycling systems are a carbon net
negative,
or at the very least, it's a wash.
It's a wash, yeah.
Because in some ways, when you recycle things, you're just giving raw materials to another industry that is just going to use it to pump carbon and other kind of pollutants into the atmosphere, and they're getting free raw materials or low cost. So, you know, and great, it's recycle, reuse. I'm not saying don't recycle, but we can't just operate on the party line. We can't trust our politicians. We can't trust the news. We can't trust our neighbors necessarily to understand, and we can't trust the information that we're given and walk away and say everything's fine, because look at the fucking results. Okay, so then in the 80s, I'm, you know, a teenager and I can't vote yet, but I'm paying attention to these kinds of things. But I'm, you know, a teenager, I'm a kid, I'm not really feeling super responsible. I turned an adult in the late 80s, and in the 90s, we finally have a Democrat as president in Bill Clinton, and I am hoping for this massive shift in policy and attention on a number of issues, including climate change, but also like the legalization of gay marriage. I thought for sure that this will happen. Didn't happen. I thought that climate change initiatives would be paid for, because that's what has to happen is tax dollars have to be fucking paid. And that means that either people have to pay more taxes, or other programs have to suffer, maybe the military, I don't know. So I have been every week, at the very least, maybe every day, maybe sometimes multiple hours in a day, been hoping and doing things and reading papers and paying attention since then. So I have had, you know, varying levels of hope throughout this whole thing.
And by the way, I got pretty hopeful in the 90s too, because in Colombia, two things happened. One, you know, you were talking about the trash picking up. So Colombia was a complete mess. Bogota was a complete mess with trash everywhere. And they started a campaign similarly, and they had this little sing song. It's like, ponga la basura en su lugar. It was, put garbage in its place. And everyone knew it. Everyone could sing it. And it became trendy. But when I was growing up, everyone would just litter on the streets willy-nilly. And I remember my dad would always be like, don't, pick up. But we were weird. Everyone, when I would pick up a thing, it's like, what are you doing? But then after that campaign, which was late 80s, when I went back to visit in mid 90s, it was a completely different place when it came to garbage. Then the second thing is also late 80s, my friend and I did a presentation about the aerosols, for the ozone layer. And back then it was a huge deal, right? Well, that, I'm not saying our presentation, but that campaign around the world of awareness and stuff worked, and they passed some regulations, and ozone got better all of a sudden. Yeah. So I was getting hopeful in the mid 90s.
Yeah, so was I. It seemed like we had crested the hill.
Yeah.
What I didn't know and appreciate at the time was that I didn't appreciate just how low-hanging of a fruit that was, because it can be fairly easily replaced, and the inconvenience of not having that, or at least to the degree that it was being used. I mean, because back in the day, it was being used for everything, and there's other ways to achieve that function of products.
But it seemed like, well, if we can make that change.
Right. It just seemed like, okay, we've crested the hill. We figured, we went on a camp, we decided. The politicians had policy. The scientists spoke up. The news organizations reported on it. It was talked about at school. We all changed our buying behavior. The companies shifted to a different compound or a different technology. And look at that. We won. It just seemed like, okay, we've arrived. And I had hope, Berto.
Yeah.
I had hope.
Let's do it for the next low-hanging fruit.
I start watching the stats. And I am seeing that throughout the 90s, it's getting worse. Annual global CO2 emissions, 1990, 2 billion tons a year, amounting to about 354 parts per million in the atmosphere. Pre-industrial, it's 280. So we're already in 1990 looking at a sharp percentage increase in the carbon in the atmosphere. In 1990, we're not experiencing any kind of hockey stick, runaway gas, or any kind of extreme global warming or climate change. But the scientists have been talking about it since the fucking 30s, or even before that. And I knew that at the time. And I'm thinking, well, this is something that it crosses party lines. It crosses borders of countries. This is something that impacts all of us. So obviously,
it's like an alien invasion or the asteroid coming. Come on. Right. Everyone needs to care about it.
We're not talking about, is it a life at conception, or about whether or not you should have a strong military. These are partisan issues or religious issues or point of view issues. There's no debate. This could be disastrous. And throughout the 90s, not only is nothing done, but the subsidizing of the oil industry, I mean, my fucking God, to this fucking day.
Right.
And the propaganda coming out of them, and the gaslighting that the oil companies will engage in to trick the public, that they still do, by the way.
Drill, baby, drill.
It's extensive.
Yeah.
I mean, just follow the money. And who is sticking up for humans? Who is sticking up for the scientists that are talking about climate change? There's no money in that. No one gives a fuck. Not even liberal politicians. They'll give lip service to it. They might pass a minor initiative here and there, but they're in the pocket of oil, or at the very least, the voters aren't prioritizing that, so they're not either. And I'm, throughout the 90s, it's upsetting. I'm watching the numbers go up. By the end of the 90s, you have 25 billion tons, an increase of 5 billion tons on global. We're seeing China, increase their industry and their standard of living. India as well, increased population around the world. And then I'm thinking, okay, well, other areas of the world are yet to develop into an industrial powerhouse, and of course that's generally what we're hoping for, right? And what our American policy is around. It's all about economy. It's the economy, stupid. Didn't Reagan say that? And so I'm like, no. That it's a disaster economy. I don't know what to do about it, and I don't want to keep people down and other countries down. But if we don't have a way to have both well-being and prospering of people without all of us going down the tubes, then we shouldn't be trying to industrialize and we should be scaling back our industry. If we can't figure out a clean way, a carbon neutral way to do what we're doing, then we should be scaling the fuck back. But we're not, Berto. People want bigger cars. They want more computers. They want crypto farms. They want more lights, including myself,
Yeah.
And back then, I'm reading the science, and I'm, at first we're talking about, and as a amateur astronomy astrophysics person, I'm very aware of Venus and its, in all likelihood, runaway greenhouse effect that happened in its geologic history, and how if you pump enough greenhouse gases, CO2 being a major one, methane being another, into the atmosphere, it causes a runaway greenhouse effect where it gets hotter, which creates a feedback loop, which releases more CO2 and more methane, which causes more heating. And eventually, if you're not aware, Venus is so uninhabitable that we can't even get a probe to last on the surface. The Soviet Union had a number of probes that they sent, and they, managed to get some pictures of the surface of Venus. Venus, you hear about Mars. We have all sorts of pictures of Mars and video and rovers that are roaming around. We have a drone. We have a little helicopter that's like flying around on Mars. And on Venus, what have you heard about Venus?
Right.
That's our sister planet. It's much more similar to Earth.
Right.
And I'm thinking, scientists are saying, and I was understanding the science around that. It's just like, so we're just going to play with fire. Literally, we're just going to roll those dice of risking, because once the feedback loops begins, we might not be able to, we could, it's not likely to happen anytime soon now that we understand the various different systems, but it could. There's a chance that we could get to a point in the near future, 50 years from now or 100 years from now, that even if we completely shut down all industry, that the runaway effect would happen just geologically within our planet that would cause a runaway greenhouse effect that would make the Earth not only completely inhabitable for humans, but inhabitable for anything, even uninhabitable for aliens to land a probe on our planet because it's so toxic and the pressure is so high, the heat is so high. So that's not a huge issue, particularly in the near term. But I remember learning about that. And the other more reasonable things that are likely to happen, and many are already happening, are increased heat waves. Already happening. We understand that, right? You see these numbers, these records being broken all over the world, especially places like Saudi Arabia and stuff with these like 140 degrees and shit like that, You have increased fires. We all know that's happening, right?
Yep.
Especially here on the West Coast, but really everywhere. Increased energy of hurricanes and cyclones. We all understand that. The science has shown that there's not necessarily an increase in the events, but the events have much increased energy, which makes total sense because when you're heating up the oceans, you get greater currents and also greater evaporation and greater just energy. That's what fuels these hurricanes is heat and temperature differences and moisture. And there's been deaths. We had a massive rain that was inland in the Appalachia Mountains or Appalachia. I can't remember how it's pronounced.
Appalachia.
And we all know North Carolina and other places like that experienced unprecedented floods and cutting off of services and death and disease and lack of water. We can't directly tie it to that because it could have happened anyway. But when you look at the big picture, it fits the models. Scientists have been talking about this again for decades. Droughts and water shortages, particularly for the underprivileged. And this has been my point since at some point scientists and other advocates learned me about this, which is that, look, climate change is unlikely to affect the privileged like you and me, Berto. So this is not self-serving. I'll be dead by it, and I won't be touched by it. The sea can rise. My house in Seattle is well above the point where the sea would rise in a day. And the amount of wealth in this area and resources in this area, and Seattle is mostly powered by renewables, hydro and solar and wind and that kind of stuff. And we're not going to run out of water. If anything, we're going to have more water with climate change. If anything, our Seattle weather is going to get better. We're going to become, more like Northern California where it's just a little warmer, and our industries will likely be totally fine. So this isn't some selfish thing. If anything, I should not even give a shit about this. Why do I care? I don't know, because I have a fucking heart, because I have empathy and I have a conscience, you know what I mean? And it's fucking logical. I'm not saying we completely do away with, with oil and other kinds of industries like this. I'm just saying, if in the 70s or even before, but particularly 70s, 80s, 90s, if partisan politics, but maybe just every American, maybe everybody on the planet, and I don't want to accuse Europe, they've done a lot of great things, and there's been a lot of great things in the States too, and China is actually doing a lot of great things as well. But anyway, if we had invested the money today, we would be much, much better off. The infrastructure would be there, the products would be there, the systems, the expectations, the technologies, and we just didn't do it, and we still are not doing it. So other things that we know that I learned about in the 90s about mass extinctions. There was a time when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s when we were talking about endangered species.
Right.
We're no longer talking about endangered species anymore. That's a joke. We're talking about complete eradication of whole ecosystems, whole coral, just giant coral reefs that you can see from Google Maps. Just dead, gone. And it's not showing up anywhere else. And there's no effort to revitalize it. And there might not be a way to revitalize it.
Yep.
All because of very slight changes in climate change and warming, or changes in currents or something. And once one thing goes down, a lot of other systems start to go down. And if you want to get selfish about it, we could go down. We depend on so many parts of our ecological system working for just food alone, let alone water and resources and supply chains and the kinds of mineral resources there's a lot of things that if one thing gets out of whack, then we will be the first to go, because we're extremely fragile and overly populated,
Right.
So there's that. Also, other things which, probably one would argue haven't happened yet, but could happen and will happen if things continue with how things are headed. Complete economic collapse, particularly of underprivileged areas. Mass migration, again, underprivileged people. Resource wars, again, probably not in the States, but in other regions of the world. Wars over water, over energy, over food. Probably not us in Seattle. And so I shouldn't give a shit, right? Or I shouldn't be voting about it because it doesn't matter to me. Or expanding ranges of insects that carry malaria and Lyme disease and other kinds of things, and killing there's already a lot of people dying along these lines, and that happening. Ice sheets melting, which is happening, right? Berto, do you remember a time when in the 90s or the 80s, they were talking about if global warming doesn't get turned around, then there will be entire glaciers that will be gone. There will be, the ice caps will diminish and be gone. Greenland will melt.
Right.
And do you remember that being told to us?
Yeah.
That it was being predicted. It wasn't seen yet.
No. It was just like a possibility in the future.
Yeah. It was like, and if this happens, then you lower the albedo, meaning the light reflection of Earth, which causes more absorption of light on Earth, which causes the runaway heating of the Earth. And you have rising sea levels and changing currents, changing salinity of currents, and also salinity of the oceans, and doing away with, if you want to think micro, of polar bears and their habitat and how they live, how they survive. There was a time when for every week or so, I am worried about ice sheets and glaciers melting, and it was talked about a lot.
Yeah.
People were talking about it. It was being talked about in college courses, in the news. Some politicians were talking about it. It was being worked into stories. Movies were about disasters and stuff. And I thought, well, all we got to, it's a big thing, but we have to work together, and we have to start cooperating with other countries. When that started to happen, but I looked at the timeline, they're like, okay, well, by the year 2050, we'll be maybe carbon neutral on the planet. I'm like, 2050?
Well, but
let's
least
let's all, what do these called? tighten our belts
Yeah.
and like let's all do as a system, as a world, let's do what we gotta fucking do.
But at least if the powerful countries are all in the same climate agreement, at least it's headed in the right direction, right?
Well, that's my point. Is maybe I mean, it was a beginning, and certainly that helps. But it wasn't the fact that those agreements had been made did not guarantee that we would all do what needed to be done. Certainly doesn't mean the United States is going to do what needs to be done. Certainly doesn't mean that capitalists aren't going to continue to capitalize. I mean, anyway, so there was a time when the ice sheets and the glaciers melting was purely theoretical and was talked about, and there were people that were screaming this, including me.
Right.
And people were just like, well, that'll be weird, or nah, it won't happen. It's already, and then I would think, okay, well, that's visual, because, in the 90s, it was all theoretical, and it was this invisible gas of CO2.
Yeah, right.
And it was an unnoticeable change in global temperature ranges, and very small differences, like 1-2 degrees difference in average temperature, drastic effects, right? And I thought, well, because I would mull this over a lot, and a lot of experts would talk about how this is not likely to change because people can't feel it. They're not going to feel it economically. They're not going to.
Right.
They can't see it.
But once they start seeing actual things melting, species going extinct, hurricanes, fires, all that stuff, that's different.
Right.
That at that point you're like, oh, okay, let's get serious.
It's a little don't look up scenario.
Yeah.
But they'll have to reckon with it because
Right.
it's happening. Their house is literally burning down.
Right.
The sea is literally rising. The ice cap is literally going away. You
Like
can
if
see it.
if you're an actor, like I don't know, some random, like James Woods, who is against climate change, but when your house burns down, literally burns down, at that point you finally
Did his house burn down?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
But at that point you finally go, okay, maybe it is time to reckon with the right, and that would happen, right?
Right. But arguably, liberals aren't doing shit either. I've been voting, and they've been in power, and they still are far from the fucking mark.
But it's not the same category. They're categorical
Different
differences.
categories.
Because one. So here is like you know earlier you were saying that you've been trying to do what you could from your position of lack of power overall, but you were trying to do what you could. But imagine if not only were you not doing what you could, but every chance you had, you were actively trying to make things worse.
Yeah.
And imagine all of us were.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, and maybe you can shine some light. So there are like 3 types of people that I'm looking at right now, and I understand 2 of them, but the last one evades me completely. One type is like you and I are sort of in this boat, which is we know it's a problem, but we are trying to do things around the edges, but we don't have the power to like magically solve it. And we're desperate. And we're like, but The second type of person knows it's a problem and they are actively engineering themselves into a future where they survive. These are like the Elon Musk, the Peter Thiels of the world. They are basically betting that Greenland, for example, will have better climate. They're betting that they can actually have bases and installations there long enough for AI computers.
By better climate, you mean warmer in Greenland.
Oh yeah, like the ice in Greenland will melt.
Yeah.
They will be able to survive there and long enough for AI and tech and plus
Meaning
die
that
off of
the equatorial regions will be so blazingly hot that it'll be completely uninhabitable.
Yeah, like billions will die.
Yeah.
They will have, and then there'll be like this feedback loop where because billions will die in their head, that means that it'll counteract some of the effects temporarily at least or whatever. But in the meantime, they're also trying to build a different utopia either here or Mars or in both places. Even though it's insane, and I think these people are psychopathic, like genocidal maniacs, I understand them. But the third type is the one that is always eluded me. These were the CEOs of the oil companies. These are the people that knew because they were told, they were shown the reports. They didn't have illusions of going to Mars and living there after a while or whatever. They do have grandkids, and yet somehow they continue to not only not care, but they continue to hide the truth and explicitly make it happen faster.
Yeah.
I don't understand those people.
Yeah.
And I can't like.
Well,
what?
I don't know if I understand anyone, Berto. Honestly, that's why. And I, to cut to the chase, I feel like I'm entitled to my goddamn feelings.
Yeah, of
and
course.
if I am demoralized and not optimistic, I'm confident that I am valid in having whatever feelings I want to have. And if I'm not telling people it's over, there's no use trying, and I am telling people there are things we can do and we should do everything in our power, at the same time as I am having normal fucking feelings after decades of fucking disappointment and it getting worse and worse and worse, I don't know. I feel like I'm entitled to having that feeling, and I'm also entitled to talk about it on my podcast, because at no point am I ever saying there's no use trying.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. I'm telling everyone it's just more important that we try harder. But I also don't have much faith, because if I knew, or if I thought there was an avenue for us as a species, because we're talking about every country and every, or at least the majority of humans understanding and also being willing to sacrifice, because sacrifices have to be made.
Yeah, like the sacrifice will come whether we do it proactively or not. And if we don't do it proactively, the sacrifices will be worse and permanent.
Yeah. So getting back to my list, we talked about the ice sheets melting. That was theoretical. It's happening, and it's just a matter of getting worse. Again, getting back to the albedo thing. Also, melting permafrost, like Greenland, releasing massive amounts of methane and CO2 into, it's not just melting Earth, it's everything that is released that's in there. Also, the potential famine, potential death, destruction. I thought for sure that when the experts were talking about this, there was a whole trend, a trope even, of movies that would talk about this sort of thing, whether it was nuclear mutual annihilation or about climate change. A lot of movies, it was so mainstream and it was so understood that it just got worked into a lot of sci-fi and apocalyptic movies,
But I've realized recently that I thought that we were all learning the same lessons from movies and shows and books that we grew up with. But it's clear that at least 30 to 50% of the population learned the opposite lessons.
Yeah.
So what
do you mean? What lesson?
Well, for example, who the good guys are and who the bad guys are.
Okay.
So here is one thing. Right now, I think it's an inflection point, because the most powerful country on this planet, one of the ones that pollutes the most and that has the most impact if they choose to, is now controlled by accelerationists, which actually don't see it as a game of like trying to slow down around the edges. They're like, no, we push it, we accelerate, and there will be billions of deaths, but we see a path where we come out of it alive. It's an inflection point, because I wonder if we are too far domesticated for full-on revolution, or if there will come a point where it's like the pain is too real, the loss is too inevitable, like too incontrovertible. Because right now, when you see people like, again, James Woods losing their house to a fire and still going, yeah, but this has got nothing to do with climate change, right? We're not there yet, apparently, right? We're not, and what you see the hurricane victims, they're not going, well, okay, now I'm never voting for the people that don't support, these initiatives. You still don't see that. But we might be nearing an inflection point, for better or for worse, where, we all have to, and like you were saying, we have to have pain. Like we do, because we're going to have pain no matter what. The question is like, do we have pain now that we control, or inevitable death pain that we don't control?
Yeah. Well, I would argue we've passed a number of inflection points and the people have spoken. Now, in my timeline, we're up to 2006, Al Gore's documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, I believe it was called.
Yep.
Extremely influential. Everyone saw that fucking thing. Everyone was talking about it. It was a huge wake-up call. It was very successful. I can't imagine a documentary like that today.
And I felt so encouraged.
Yeah, everyone was talking about it. People that were not following the science and were not staring into the darkness as they were trying to fall asleep at night about this. Everyone was talking about it. Just regular soccer moms and dads who like to go hunting on the weekends and stuff. Like, everyone was talking about it. I thought, okay, finally, we've crested the hill. No one is really arguing against this. Like, there were some pro-oil people that were shouting into the darkness a little bit, but it was a consensus. Regardless of partisanry, everyone was like, "Yeah, wow, I don't think this is a good idea. We got to let's work together. Let's figure something out."
I don't think so, man.
No. There was still partisan politics, but the sea change seemed to be happening, and there seemed to be a zeitgeist. And I heard different things from Republican politicians, not all of them, but I was starting to hear things that were coming in our direction. So I had tremendous hope at the time. But after that, Berto, that's when they really kicked into high gear. And I encourage people to watch one of my favorite, if not my favorite, YouTube channel called Climate Town, which I've talked about before on this podcast, just talking about favorite YouTube channels that I watch. And he's hilarious. He's very smart and entertaining while giving a lot of really great information about how systems and how corporations and policy and history and how deception of, all this stuff, because before this, the oil companies and people that have monetary interest in all this, they didn't really have to do much to retain their money and power and influence and policy because there wasn't much of an effort to change that. After this, there was an effort to change it. So then they kicked into high gear. And like I was saying earlier, there's no money in advocating for anti-climate change. The environment doesn't have a coffer of profits that they can pay humans to think and do things to influence the world. The oil company and the energy companies have seemingly an unlimited amount of funds and resources and connections, politician-wise. So they really started kicking in high gear. And I have a list of things that we've all heard before, Berto, and there are many more. Things like, it's a hoax, or that one politician that brought in a snowball and said, this is your climate change. It's snowing outside. It's really cold. It's colder than normal. It's not global warming. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Or sure, it's going up. We'll admit that, but it's not humans. It's just a natural thing.
By the way, that took years to even get to that point.
Yeah.
It took years to get to the point of like, fine, there are some changes happening. Because up until then, it was like, there is like climate changes daily. Right, like that was the whole climate change daily, like weather.
Well,
you mean?
and there hadn't been a drastic, noticeable trend. There seemed to be on the scatter plot an indication that things were changing, but it was kind of unclear because we didn't have centuries of data.
Right, it just became inconvenient when the news was like so obvious that they would look like ridiculous, claiming that the sun doesn't come out in the morning.
And I've been tracking that shit because that has been interesting to me and has been a win, but it has also been demoralizing to see them make that change, but be so far from the mark. Yeah, I've been noticing that as well. It's like, oh, wait, now the Republican Party line is to admit that the temperature is rising. That's a change, but they're always moving the goalpost. Now it's the sunspots, it's just random fluctuations, or literally
fluctuations,
or literally it's God's design.
Yeah,
people will say.
Right, we can't discount that aspect because, and this is the super sad part. At the end, when it's actually like fire and everyone's on fire and we're looking around and you're like, well, now what do you think? The final like get out of jail free card is, well, this Armageddon. Like we always knew that we were gonna.
This is why the movie Don't Look Up was so resonant with so many of us.
Yes, because
we've been living this for a long time, and it's such a cartoon. But I have to say, and I'm not accusing the emailer in because her email was far from this threshold, but I get occasionally more pointed emails along these lines. And I have to say, the way it feels is I am Jennifer Lawrence and Leo DiCaprio on Good Morning America with Kate Blanchett and Tyler Perry, and they're just like, wow, bummer. Anyway, let's make a joke about it. That's what it feels like to me. Yeah. The hosts of the TV show weren't denying that a comet was about to collide with the Earth. They were just saying, I don't like the way your emotions are right now, and that's bumming me out. So let's just be happy. Okay, let's just smile our way into oblivion. How about we do that? Or fine, you want to smile, and maybe you're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing as well. Great. But don't look at me with my emotions and tell me I'm not supposed to have my fucking feelings and I'm not supposed to acknowledge fucking reality.
Right.
That I've been watching this, and we all have been, and people have been doing a lot more shit than I have, obviously, and we've been just driving ourselves more and more into the dirt.
Yeah.
Every day, more and more belching of just general pollution, let alone carbon dioxide, into the atmosphere. More and more policies that are passed over and changed. Drill, baby, drill. It's just getting worse and worse. The culture of buying giant fucking cars and driving every no one gives a fuck about. That was another thing that I had a lot of optimism about. In the 80s, there was this huge movement, mainly because of California changing emissions laws and other kinds of guidelines, that suddenly everyone, when they would buy a car, was looking at the mileage of a car.
Yeah.
There was a time when cars were getting smaller and more compact and more efficient. Hondas were very popular at the time, and with my name is Honda and my family would always buy Honda, it just seemed like, oh, in the future, we're going to be driving cars that have almost no emissions and have very high miles per gallon. And that is just not the fucking case. It is better, and the emissions are improving per car, and there are efficient engines out there. But culturally speaking, people don't really care that much, and don't really orient. On average, don't. So other things that I've heard and continue to hear is that if the Earth warms and climate changes, then it's a good thing, because if you live in Canada or Greenland or Seattle, it's only going to fuck over the poor and the underprivileged, the shithole countries, as Trump said. It's Africa, it's India, it's Ecuador, or whatever.
And by the way, although I totally understand and agree with your point that you were saying, hey, you're not even coming at this from a point of like, you're about to screw up my lifestyle, right? Let's not forget that even things like a pandemic or a forest fire have directly affected us here. And we live in, arguably, like what you're saying, one of the most insulated locations that we could be in.
Yeah. And, the fires were pretty bad, but I would take that over complete famine and lack of water to feed my kids.
It's just that inevitably what's going to happen is we don't grow all our food here. We don't grow all our stuff here.
Totally.
We import it. So no matter where you are on Earth, you're going to be touched. To your point, though, the first people that are going to feel it the hardest are the most underprivileged.
Yeah. Other things they'll say to this day, that it's a liberal conspiracy to gain power. Those scientists, they're all liberal. They're all university professors. They've been after Republicans and the real Americans since the beginning.
No, geniuses are now back in vogue, as long as you're a genius technocrat.
Yeah. Also, hey, you told us in science class that carbon dioxide is food for plants. Are you against food for plants? What's wrong with you? Also, renewable energy will destroy our economy. If we switch over to electricity today, our entire economy will fall apart.
Yeah, you're trying to make people suffer by making them poor?
Well, and the other thing is it's a straw man, because no expert in climate activism or in energy policy would propose that we just completely outlaw petroleum products overnight. We would have a transition period, and we'd have to invest, and we'd have to tax, and we'd have to tighten our belts, and we'd have to fucking sacrifice, and maybe not tremendously, particularly if we had started this a long fucking time ago.
Well, and there's the really cynical argument of, well, why did we exit the Paris climate? Oh, that's not even enough, so we might as well just exit.
Right. Or they're trying to take away our gas ovens. I mean, that whole fucking thing just drove me goddamn crazy. I mean, when you understand the bigger picture around natural gas and the literal propaganda that's paid for by the oil companies to make it, quote unquote, natural gas, makes it sound nice, right? And okay, I have a natural gas fireplace, and a natural gas water heater. I don't know why my house just has those two things, but it does.
Right.
It came with that. I'm not turning on my fireplace occasionally. It's not like it's an individual environment crime, but I would have no problem if natural gas was, as a policy for a country or a state, was transitioned to other energies and said, look, let's do away with plastic straws. It's not going to save the world, but we got to start somewhere. And so let's start here. And it's a crude way, if we all just switch over to other types of energy like electricity, but we're burning coal, like it's not really helping, but eventually we've got to get here, primarily because but natural gas is leaking. Like there's something like 10% leakage just in the system. And natural gas is a very powerful greenhouse fucking gas. So we are just willingly, for some stupid ass reason, participating in a massive infrastructure that has a lot of money behind it. That's just like, just think about the technology that would be required to keep this gas in the pipes going to all these goddamn homes.
Yep.
Through earthquakes and poor fittings and old fittings and people kicking a pipe. I mean, the pipes on my house are just exposed on the out of the house. What if someone were to hit it with a wheelbarrow or something?
Right.
And like, it's not a viable system long term. I'm not saying that you're not supposed to like a gas stove. If you want a gas stove, it's fine. It's not overall we got to move down the road. But just that micro thing that they're like, I think, didn't Florida pass some sort of law that's like, you can't take away our gas stoves or something? It's like, Jesus Christ, like pull your head out. It's not that liberals are coming after your goddamn gas stove. It's look at the big picture. We're all in the picture. This isn't a liberal picture. Anyway, so the other thing that you'll hear is like, what's the point? China and India are polluting more per capita now, or they're actually not more per capita, but more overall than we are. So I don't know where the thresholds are, but something like that. It's like, if they're not going to do it, then why should we? Why should we suffer if they're not going to suffer? It's just complete idiocy.
Wait, but that one, again, the things that just never make sense to me, because those same people teach their kids, like, just because Johnny over here stepped on the thing doesn't mean you should, right? They teach that lesson daily, but apparently we can't learn that lesson as adults. Like,
yeah. People are investing in their 5-year-olds' college funds, and then meanwhile voting against the climate. Like, what?
Yeah.
Do you think your kids are going to live on a different planet?
Yeah.
I mean, some of them do, right? Wind turbines kill so many birds, or wind turbines overall use so much energy just to make them that you need to have them up for like 35 years to offset the downside of even making the wind turbine, which is just patently false when you look at the data. I mean, those are interesting things to look at, like with electric cars. Yep. It seems like, but when you look at the lithium, the battery, and the manufacturing, like, it doesn't mean let's just use gas combustion cars.
There's nuance.
But let's look at the overall thing. Let's invest in infrastructure, and let's start to talk about supply chains and how much of a car do you need. And
like right now, the trend with all the IT companies is to send all the workers back to work.
Right.
And I'm talking about a lot of woke, quote unquote, companies that know that climate change is real, that pride themselves on how green they are, and they don't give a fuck.
Like Amazon, who literally named the arena in Seattle, not
Climate
Amazon,
Pledge.
Climate Pledge Arena.
Right. But they're like, yeah, but all our workers should drive every day because and oh my gosh, this one is the biggest irony. Right now, all these companies are racing to get AI to replace human jobs, right? And the irony is that AI doesn't have to drive to work, but the humans will still need to.
Right. Yeah. Or that you'll hear people say that climate activism is just an excuse to make a socialist or communist or something. But another one that has nuance to it is you'll hear some people say, even some liberals, they'll say, well, we'll figure it out eventually. We're working on technology, or we're making solar panels more efficient, this kind of thing. And yeah, I hope so. There's a possibility that we will. But do we want to roll the goddamn dice? I mean, there's a chance that we could do nothing to improve the environment, and we could even just say, fuck it, we'll all just like burn as much fossil fuels as we want, and we won't do anything. And there's a chance that someone will, like cold fusion will come out or something and actually be so affordable that people would be stupid not to use it, and it'll just completely revolutionize the energy system of the entire world, and everything will be fine. There's a chance. And there's a lot of people working on stuff like this. Do we want to roll the goddamn dice?
Look, there's Jenny and Mary. They both have a piano recital coming in 1 month. It's a fact. They both have a piano recital. Neither of them is ready. They have pieces they don't know how to play. But the piano recital's coming.
Yeah.
Jenny,
maybe the piano room will burn down.
Well, the good news is Jenny is planning to practice every day, and her parents have made allocated time and are rewarding her efforts. Mary was hoping to practice every day. Her parents slap her every time she gets close to the piano. Which one do we think is going to be ready for the piano recital? Because that's what we are doing to ourselves right now. Yeah. We are not only not, because you're saying, the attitude of like, well, technology, we'll figure it out. No, because we are actually de-incentivizing all of that, and we're only rewarding the expenditure of the oil, and we are demonizing anyone. Yeah, it's like, so it's not just that if we practice, we'll get there. We're not even allowed to practice.
Well, there are people that are working on cold fusion, for example. There have been some advances. It's not. I wouldn't predict that we're going to have a viable commercial application within our lifetime. It's possible that we will, but that's just one of the and then to bring it up to scale, you would have to have all these power plants around the world, which might take 300 years to build. I don't know.
For this to be a sort of more realistic hope, what it would take is governments investing in this, right? Governments actively supporting and investing in this.
And investing and changing policy.
Right.
I mean, just imagine if we had, forget about Republicans and Democrats. Let's just say we lived on this fictional planet where there are no political parties, and the people in power just decided to do everything we can within reason, and everyone would change slightly. When cars had to become lower emissions because of California law, and the rest of the country and the auto manufacturers just said, fuck it, we'll just have our cars meet the California standard, and we'll sell that car to everyone because we don't want to make two different cars. That was inconvenient. It created, I think the cars might have cost more in all likelihood. The manufacturers had to invest in more technology. They had to develop things. The cars probably had a little bit less horsepower, I'm guessing. I don't know. There were changes to unleaded gasoline and other kinds of things like this. There were sacrifices. Things had to change. It wasn't that big of a deal. For the average person, if you didn't even tell them that this has happened, they wouldn't have fucking noticed.
Right.
They would have just gone to the car lot every 7 years and bought a new car, and they'd be like, oh, this one has better gas mileage. And I seem to see less like black soot coming out of the back of the car, but whatever. I'm moving on in life. I'm just trying to get to work every day. And there's a lot of things that we could have done and we could be doing now that would be drastic changes in the outlook of the future that would be, there would be overall sacrifices. Maybe some people would really be sacrificing, but on average, not that much. Anyway, like not watering your goddamn lawn. How about that? In an area where you have so little water to begin with. If you're watering your lawn in Seattle, that doesn't fucking matter. There's a lot of water just coming down from the mountains in Seattle.
Sure.
But if you're in Arizona and you have a goddamn lawn, which most of them don't, that's been changing. But just don't. Now, if someone does, if one of my listeners out there does, it's not that big of a deal. I'm not gonna.
But these are incremental things, and they add up in mass. And
en masse. The overall. If we had a culture that did not highlight the importance of a lawn, and maybe even highlighted the importance of having an environmentally friendly and viable approach to one's yard. But just, get away from that. Just like the prestige of having this perfectly green lawn, maybe we would have a different scenario. Things are changing. In Seattle, I see it happen all the time. As a kid, it was just rampant sprinklers in everyone's house and, in everyone's yard. It was just like all day long in the summer. Today, I hardly ever see or hear a sprinkler. I mean, in your neighborhood, do you see many sprinklers in the summer?
Only a few.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's rare.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not shaming those people.
And they're timed, so it's like in the early morning, they sprinkle that.
And that's especially in Seattle, there's a lot of water. But it's just the overall wanton disregard for all of the measures that, so I, in the 2000s, am increasingly terrified and upset and hopeful. One could say, looking back, that the 2000s was where I was the most active and the most hopeful. Maybe talking about it the most, maybe doing the most, maybe paying attention to the research and the science the most, because it just seemed like we've got to do something. We're at the brink here, After the Al Gore documentary, and I got my hopes up, and things kept getting worse, and then the oil companies poured all the money into the oil company. So Climate Town actually did a whole expose, and this is very credible. So he sources everything. He's not just yammering. He goes over reports and shows the work. And the oil companies are literally funding children's books that are pro-oil to have them inserted in libraries in public schools. Because public schools are underfunded and can't get access to books because they're not given enough money by local taxes and maybe by the federal government. I don't know. And they'll just say, well, fine, we'll take those books. And these books are being given to kids as just like regular children's books. And the entire book is just this obvious programming of young children about the importance of and the wonderful American aspect of petroleum and how it's involved in anyway.
But again, this is where I guess my only conclusion has to be that the people in charge of these companies are not very smart, that they are successful in spite of being very dumb or something. Because
when you have a culture that values prestige and money and wealth, and you have a system without any guardrails.
No, that's right. But they must not believe that the problem is real.
They'll convince themselves of anything.
Right. Because what I can't understand is if you believe, like, if all of a sudden someone came and like, hey, Honda, we want to make you the CEO for ExxonMobil. Would you all of a sudden overnight be like, okay, yeah, let's fund disinformation?
It's a funny question, obviously, but I do not consider myself any smarter or wiser or immune to the pressures of self-interest and social conforming. If I were truly to be a CEO of ExxonMobil and was truly actually trying to do a good job, undoubtedly my mind would start to change and I would start to look the other way, or I would have some kind of, and I actually do know enough about some of the leadership in these oil companies to know that some of them are very much like you and me and talk like you and me. And they will maybe be tricking themselves into thinking that they're doing a lot. They've increased the spending on renewable research from X to Y, and they avoid looking at the bigger picture because, one, they might not have much control over it. And if they did do something about it, they'd be fired. And the guy waiting in the wings is worse. I don't know what I would do if I were in a
don't
situation.
think people are as malleable as you're making them to be. There's no way on earth that and I don't think you would either, be a person in Congress lying to the cameras, knowing full well what's the truth constantly, right?
Not that, no. But that's not what I was describing.
I know. You're talking about a way more nuanced person in these businesses, and
the outcome is the same.
But the person I'm saying person, the people in charge for the last 3-4 decades that have seen the data and all these things, like, I'm convicting them. They have no excuse.
No. And I would if I were to be that, that hypothetical CEO that believed everything that you and I believe and know and follow the science, and I did everything within my small pocket of power to change the system, but I didn't quit, and I didn't do an expose, and I didn't yell, and I didn't demand. If I would be absolutely guilty
as charged. It's just like the cigarette. Well, of course, worse, but it's like the cigarette CEOs, right? It's like, They knew.
Yeah. And along these lines, the biggest trick that the oil companies played on us is to make us all individually think that we are responsible individually for the environment.
Yeah.
We, you, Berto, and me, I have to recycle. I have to conserve. I have to look into solar. I have to buy from responsible companies. Guess how far that gets us down the road? Nowhere.
Yeah.
It I guess makes it a little better. Maybe if I'm being given the right information from the company that is selling me something that they're claiming is without the regulations and the oversight, who the fuck knows? Well, it's the fact that people are still buying Volkswagens after what they fucking pulled is absolute evidence of the goddamn denial that people will go into.
Yeah.
They lied.
Yeah.
Top to bottom, a mass conspiracy against humans.
Yeah.
For money.
Yeah.
Do you think Volkswagen was incapable of following the rules regarding emissions in their cars? Do we think that they lacked the technology in Germany? No. They could have. They knew they could have. And they conspired as a leadership. Do you know how many hundreds of people would have had to sign off on that conspiracy?
Yeah, man. So you know about Deutsche Bank. They helped criminal organizations throughout the world for a long time just operate. They probably still do, in all honesty. But when all this came out, did they lose a beat? Did they get penalties?
Right. The only answer is not asking you and me to do something, and also not asking companies to do something. The only answer is if government makes everyone do something.
But that's the thing that you and I do need to do, which unfortunately is all of us, is we need to vote the right people that will do something about it.
I've been trying.
I know.
Give me the options.
I know. Because right now, the people that got voted in are 180 degrees opposite.
And nearly every Democrat I've voted into is also far from the mark.
I'm telling you, it's different
Jay
categories.
Inslee was the only one.
Different categories. We were
different
in the
categories,
Paris Accord.
Both below the threshold.
I know, but we were in the Paris Accord, but we still had minorities in the House and Senate. And so what are you going to do?
And maybe you're right. Maybe if we could sustain control over various segments of the federal government, we could have a different and much better situation now. Probably better.
Like it would have been a dream come true if the choice was between Biden and like a progressive climate hawk who wants to fix the climate. That would have been amazing. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
We're like, sorry, Biden, I don't care that you're old. I care that you didn't do enough. You and the other Democrats. We're voting all these people in charge because they want to actually fix the problem.
Yeah.
Instead, the choice was between Biden and minorities in both houses and the end of the world.
Right. So 2010 happens, 33 billion tons released into the atmosphere by humans that year. The carbon dioxide parts per million rises again to 390 on average. Remember, we started at pre-industrial at 280. So we're looking at like a 35-40% increase in geologically the blink of an eye. And every day I'm following the story, the politics, the attitudes, the research, the personal practices, the different kinds of measures that people could take. I mean, the minutia of just recycling alone in Seattle changes all the time.
Yeah.
About like what you can and what you can't. And you can drive this particular plastic to this one place and then exposés about how they're just throwing it in the dump anyway. And I'm following all the technologies, the wind turbines, the hydro, the solar, battery technology, various different ways of storing energy for the grid, and nuclear, and also trying to change. A lot of liberals hate nuclear for really silly reasons, ridiculous fucking reasons we've known for decades. And yes, there's problems with all energy, but nuclear by far, if there's opportunities for nuclear, on average, we need to be taking that.
Yeah.
Because some amount of nuclear waste isn't great, and we need to figure out ways of storing it or disposing it or reusing it or something. But when you talk about the amount of carbon dioxide and other things that are going into the atmosphere, cold fusion, as I talk about, geothermal, LED technology, There was a whole movement, I remember, in the 90s about like powering cars with like oil left over from McDonald's and their making of the fries. There were occasional cars that they would drive by and you would just smell like French fries. I mean, they literally would smell like French. Do you remember these cars?
No.
Yeah. Also, the whole technology around hydrogen cells, that seemed very promising. It's not carbon emission free because you got to make the...
They smell like French fries because they were powered on...
The literal oil from the French fry machine.
Got it.
Tidal energy, wave energy from the ocean, giant sun mirrors in space that focus on, all the photons on a very high reactive solar panel system of some kind, and so on. And nothing is happening. Fast forward to 2020. One thing that happened during the pandemic is there was a decrease in energy uses and emissions, but of course, we knew that there would be, it would recover and continue to increase, which it has done.
I was so sad because I knew I was being naive, but I was like, man, I wonder if this could be the kickstart. When people realize that, oh, wait, we can live in a different way.
Yeah, there were animals that were returning to areas that no one had seen them for a while, So here's what I'll say after ranting way longer than I thought I was going to, but... Number one is that I think I'm being lumped in with climate pessimists and denialists because there are party lines from denialists, and maybe we call them Republicans, I don't know, but like people that don't want to do anything. And philosophically, they do not believe that climate change is real or that it matters, or they're accelerationists, or they believe in a God that it's like, well, this is what God wants for us. So, the apocalypse is coming. It talks about the Bible. I want to go to heaven because I know I'm a good person. So, blah, blah. There's a lot of different types of people that are in this category. And the types of things they will say will be, we're doomed. Why try? I am not saying that.
Right.
I'm not saying the opposite of that. I'm not saying to Jennifer Lawrence and Leo DiCaprio, don't be such a bummer.
Right.
But I'm not saying it's over, we're doomed, there's no use. I'm not saying that. I feel like I'm being lumped in with that. That's not what I am. I can have my feelings and advocate for increased efforts and do whatever I can do personally. But I, as a human being, and us as individuals are not going to change it around. It has to be policy. There has to be laws. In every country of all the continents of the world, there has to be laws that keep corporations and industry and practices within a certain limits. That's the only way this is going to work. Elon Musk isn't going to solve this problem and isn't seemingly interested in it,
Yeah.
There have to be laws, and those laws have to have consequences. And if you're going to have consequences, you have to fund those agencies to monitor and dole out the punishments, because those punishments are going to have to be doled out.
It is possible in this weird, bizarre way that I'm not enjoying, but we might end up getting lucky that the current situation ends up being so disastrous in the opposite direction that the backlash and overreaction in the direction we want ends up being massive.
I mean, I'll take anything. Yeah. I've been thinking that would happen 2 or 3 decades ago when the ice sheets were visibly starting to go. I thought they would look up at that point.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying what you're saying won't happen. I don't even know. Maybe it's happening right now. I don't know. Maybe it'll become popular with Republicans. Who knows? When I was a Christian growing up, I was explicitly taught that to pollute the earth is to pollute on God.
Yeah.
Because God created the earth.
I know.
And if you shit on earth, you're shitting on God.
I tried that argument at one point with, a relative who's very religious. And I was like, shouldn't we be taking better care of the garden here?
Right.
Yeah.
Number one, I feel like I'm being lumped in. I think that's what's happening, but don't lump me in. Number two, I have to say, when people criticize me this way, it feels invalidating and it hurts my fucking feelings. I'm not telling anyone how to feel their feelings. At no point am I telling anyone that you're supposed to feel whatever I'm feeling. I don't care how you feel. Feel whatever you want to feel. I care what you do. I care how you vote. but I'm not going to judge you as an individual in the same way that I don't think you, Berto, and I, Kirk, am to blame for what's happening. I also don't blame any one individual listening right now if you voted for Trump or if you don't give a shit about recycling. I don't blame you for the problem because it's an overall cultural problem and a government problem and a world government problem.
Well, I am at the point of voting or blaming Trump voters, but I don't blame him for the inability to stop climate change. I blame him for voting for Trump.
Well, at any rate,
yeah,
it hurts my feelings when people criticize me for being a human being and discounting me and saying I shouldn't be saying what I'm saying and I shouldn't feel how I feel.
Right.
When I feel like I fucking earned it. I'm not just this fly-by-night observer who's just choosing to have a feeling. I believe I'm having an extremely rational goddamn feeling, and I've been having it since the 70s.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid looking around at adults going, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I wasn't alarmed back then because I figured, well, we'll grow up and we'll take over and everything will be fine. Didn't happen. So you can feel how you feel out there, however you want to feel.
It's, by the way, it's interesting. I had a different feeling as a kid because I was growing up in Colombia, where at the time it was a mess. And I don't just mean climate wise. I just mean like as a society, it was a mess. So I didn't have this perspective of like, oh, I think things can work out just in general. You know, I was always like, yeah, damn, everything's just such a mess. Everyone's so corrupt. Everyone's so violent. Everything's terrible. But I did look to the U.S. as like the little shining hill in the distance where I was like, well, at least that place looks nice. And of course, I was being naive. I didn't really know all about the horrible excesses and abuses and stuff. But it was just my notion. Plus, my mom lived here, so I had like reasons to idealize it.
That's where He-Man came from.
That's where He-Man came from. But I will say that as a result, once I was here, I was infused with hope. And so you know, I think that through the 90s, I didn't yet know enough politics or whatever, but like you were saying, it was like I was seeing some change. What I think right now, though, is I wonder if, and maybe it's not even because of climate signs, maybe it's not because the hurricanes get worse or whatever. Maybe it's all to do with like what the next pandemic does to us or whatever. I wonder, I guess I'm just curious where the breaking point is for all of us to say, oh, okay, we're not going to just live that movie. Let's not make that movie come fully true.
I used to have hope along those lines. I still have hope. I have a different kind of hope, I guess. I mean, I can't predict the future, but before, particularly in the aughts, I had hope that we were on the brink of changing it around, of all agreeing and working on this as a global community. And we are, to some extent. The U.S. government is doing things. People in the United States are doing things. People in China, people in India, people in Europe. There are advances. Things are happening. Scientists, and it is an incentive economically. If you can come out with a more efficient solar panel, which is happening all the time, then you're going to make money. And that's how our capitalist system works, and it's working. There are incentives. There are tax breaks. There are measures. But it's too little, potentially too late. I do have hope. Like I said, it's a different kind of hope. Because it's not just with climate change. It's with vaccines and with science around how to prevent mass death by a pandemic. I don't know the stats, but I would be surprised if there are more anti-vaccination people today than there were in 2019.
Oh, no, I'm sure of it.
Which is
100%.
Which I don't think anyone would have predicted.
Never ever would have predicted that.
You would think that if people were dying in the millions, that people would say, "Oh, well, okay, I can listen to Jenny McCarthy talk about how vaccines cause problems, and I can look at my next door neighbor or my grandfather who died because he refused to get a vaccine, and I can see it, the proofs in the pudding here."
Yeah.
So obviously vaccines don't solve all the problems and we need to do science around it. But when you look at the data, which is very clear from multiple angles, that when you have a vaccinated individual and a vaccinated population, not only are individuals less likely to die and have long COVID, but whole communities, whole areas. Seattle and the near surrounding areas was one of the most compliant areas of the United States. And guess fucking what? And we were ground zero.
Yeah,
we were the first place that it started to show up. So we should have experienced the most deaths. And guess what? Per capita, one of the least, because we understand science and we're not susceptible to propaganda from the right. We weren't following the liberal suggestion. We were following
the Trump White House vaccine.
We were following the science. I'm not going to listen to a goddamn politician.
No, I know, but the irony is that it was actually our worst enemy was in power at the time, telling us that he cured the damn thing with his vaccine, and we still took the damn vaccine.
And he took the vaccine.
So this is what's so cartoony about this.
So in conclusion about that, on multiple domains regarding society as a whole and politics as a whole and Twitter as a whole, not only is it hard for me to have hope in the immediate future with climate change, but it's hard for me to have hope on a number of domains. But anyway, let me finish. Number 3 on my list here is, if my feelings are unmotivating to you, I don't know what to say to that. That bums me out. That is not what I want, obviously. But I don't understand why my life and I'm on the planet too, you know? I'm not just a podcaster in the sky, you know? I'm on this planet. I'm affected. I'm allowed to have these feelings. I'm allowed to have how I'm processing things, and I believe that I'm rational. I'm not proposing that everyone's supposed to have the exact same or even close to what I'm feeling, but I don't think I'm strange. And if my rational reaction is unmotivating to you, then I don't know what to do with that. That is terrifying to me. Now, some people would say, well, Kirk, you have a platform. You should be lifting people up. I think that's just Cate Blanchett and Tyler Perry saying, geez, stop bumming me out. I would hope that what I'm saying right now is motivating. Because when I get hopeless or when I get angry, when I have less hope, then I get angry. And when I get angry, I do something. I point the anger. This whole rant is related to anger. If I pointed my anger at myself, then I guess I would shut my feelings down, or I would become depressed, or I would give up, or I would yell at someone else about how they feel. I'm not doing that.
I think what might be hard is because you do have a platform and you're laying these feelings out, which you're totally entitled to. But people look up to you, and so they're waiting for you to then say, but here's the solution. Do the following 3 steps, and we will cure it.
And
right?
I believe that is don't look up.
Yeah.
For me to do that is to participate in the soothing of the masses about something they should not be fucking soothed by.
Yeah.
You should not be soothed. I am not here to soothe you.
Right. Now, what if we focus this lack of soothing and honest portrayal? Because the thing that does get in the way is we on the left are very, very fractioned because we end up arguing about a lot of particulars. We need to fight for all causes at all times equally loudly. And so then you end up with all these little subsections. On the right, in this country, I'm just talking about what I know in this country, they seem to be able to unite, around a very simple doctrine, even if it's like a death cult. So maybe what we need is to be able to unite around just this and say, look, screw everything else. Oh, you want better healthcare? Fuck it. Oh, you want a little more equality? No, forget it. We're triaging. There's one cause and one cause only. We need a party and we need people that will go into power in politics with one agenda, and it is climate. And that's it. Everything else, but I don't give a shit. But whatever, I don't care. One cause, climate.
Or at least a number one priority cause.
I'm saying one, period. Once we are in a path where maybe we don't suffer the worst of it. Okay, bring your number 2 cause now.
Yeah.
But literally ruthless. You ask the politician, if they give you any vacillation, they're done. Next.
We had a presidential candidate that was exactly that.
Yeah, I know. And he was cheated out of his position.
Well, he was probably dead last in the polls.
Wait, no. Are you talking about Gore? Because Gore won.
No, you don't even know who it was. This is in the last election, my friend.
Oh, I don't know who you're talking about.
Yeah.
Who are you talking about?
I'm talking about Jay Inslee.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I didn't know.
Yeah, so you didn't even know. That's how unpopular he was. But that was his sole running position, was climate change.
So we need to elevate these people and solely elevate these people.
And I was trying.
Yeah.
Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.